Hey guys, it's Shadow. This is my personal tier list for all Imperial Age Unique Technologies. Please note this video is entirely my own opinion and purely for entertainment purposes. Shall we begin? First up, we have the Aztecs with Garland Wars. It gives your infantry +4 attack, and I think it's a pretty strong technology. It basically means that you have some of the best infantry in the late game, and Aztecs already have a lot of bonuses for their infantry anyway, allowing them to reduce them faster and having eagles as an option. I think this is a really strong technology, and I'm gonna give it a B tier for the moment. It might even be an A tier Imperial Age technology, but it is a little bit gold heavy, 750 gold. Berbers have Maghrabi camels, and it allows your camel units to regenerate. It costs 700 food and 300 gold, and I think it's pretty essential to getting to the Berbers late in the game. Most of the time with their armor compositions, you will have at least one camel unit, if that is camel archers or heavy camels. It depends on the pacing of the game. I would probably put this as a B tier technology as well, similar to the Aztecs. It's a strong technology and it will be researched in most games, but I don't think it's the most powerful one in the game. Next up, we have Britons with Warwolf. It costs 800 wood and 400 gold, and I think this is one of those really strong technologies. Basically, this means that you'll always win treb wars, as it has 100% accuracy and it does area effect damage as well. I think this is probably going to be an A tier technology. I think there are still a couple stronger Imperial Age unique technologies, but this is definitely up there with the strongest. Next up, we have the Bulgarians with Byzantines. It gives you a militia line +5 armor, but it costs 900 food and 450 gold. Now, situationally, this is a very strong technology. Most specifically in like a Goths matchup, this means that your militia line really hard counter most of their units. That being said, in most other situations that I can think of, it's not that useful for a technology and it's pretty expensive. It's gonna be a D tier for the moment. It might even be on the E tier, I'm not 100% certain. Next up, we have one of my favorite ones in terms of the execution of it, the Burgundian Revolution, or Flemish Revolution, my apologies. It converts all your villages to Flemish militia, and it costs 800 food and 450 gold. Now, Flemish militia are a really good unit, but sacrificing your entire economy to get them rarely seems worth it. There are occasions where I've seen it work and it can work, but for the most part, it's too big of a trade-off to make it worth it. Especially in most 1v1 situations, I'd say. I think it's going to be a D tier technology, not in terms of the joy it brings me to use it, but in terms of the usability. Next up, we have Manipur Cavalry, the Burmese unique technology. It allows your cavalry in a round bite to do bonus 6 damage to buildings, and it costs 650 food and 400 gold. This is another one of those kind of situational technologies to pick up, mainly because you're not generally using cavalry or a round bite to go and wipe through buildings. It does, however, make them really strong against buildings, especially if you're taking down stables and barracks, for example. And you've got some knights in front or some a rambai, for example, that can just go and take down some buildings. It's gonna be another one of those D tier ones though, because realistically you should be using siege, and it doesn't make your cavalry a replacement for siege, but it does make them able to take out town centers very easily. Coming next, we have Byzantines with Logistica. It allows cataphracts to do trample damage, and it gives them an extra 6 bonus damage against infantry on top of their already pretty good bonus. It costs 800 food and 600 gold. The issue here is that it impacts one unit that the Byzantines don't often get to make en masse. Cataphracts are very expensive in general and expensive to fully upgrade, and Logistica just adds to that expense. If you do get to fully upgraded cataphracts, they are such a beastly unit. They can take down pretty much anything except other heavy cavalry, especially Paladin. But I realistically don't think it's that strong of a technology, and it's going to go in the E tier. Bureau Celtica for the Celts is next, and it gives your siege weapons a bonus 40% hit points. It does cost quite a bit of food and gold, 750 food and 450 gold. But the amount of extra hits that it means your siege rams can take, for example, is just beyond this world. And your siege onagers are so tanky as well, and even your scorpions are suddenly a lot harder just to kite with ranged units, for example, especially ones like Britons, which have the extra range. I would probably put this in the B tier with the Aztecs and the Berbers. It's a strong technology. It's not completely game-changing per se, but it does make them a really powerful late-game siege civ. Probably the strongest, maybe with the exception of something like Slavs. Coming next, we have the Chinese with Rocketry. It increases your Chukonu and Scorpion attack. Your Chukonus increase by 2 and your Scorpions by 4. It costs 600 wood and 600 gold. Now, the thing with Rocketry, it's actually more efficient to get that for your upgrades your Chukonus before getting Elite Chukonu, due to Elite Chukonu only actually adding an additional 5 HP. I don't actually know if it increases the rate of fire or anything like that. You'd have to check the wiki for that. But from what I've seen, most of the time you're better off prioritizing Rocketry over Elite Chukonu for the upgrades. It only impacts one unit, but Chukonus are such a standard of the late game Chinese army that it's not as similar to Byzantines cataphracts. But getting to them is pretty expensive and difficult. It's gonna be another B tier one, probably just behind the Berber Maghrabi Camels. I think the Maghrabi Camels is just a little bit more versatile, but it's still a strong technology. Next up, we have Cuban Mercenaries, which allows your team to train up to 10 elites Kipchaks for free. It costs 650 food and 400 gold, and this is obviously one of those technologies that has more value in team games, but a lot of the time, your allies won't have the upgrades for cavalry archers or archers in general. In a team game, you might have yourself and your 2 flanks, for example, that we're having the archer upgrades, and those 2 flanks might not even get cavalry upgrades, for example, especially if you've got like a mine flank. So it's a situationally decent unique technology that I don't think has that much of a usage in 1v1s. Because you'll most likely, if you're going Kipchaks anyway, you'll most likely be wanting to get elite Kipchak and continuing to train your Kipchaks from the castle normally. I think it's gonna go in the E or the D tier. I can make an argument that it's probably stronger for me than Logistico in more situations, only slightly, but definitely not more so than Manipur Cavalry, so we're gonna keep it in the E tier for the moment. Next up, we have a really expensive technology from the Ethiopians, Torsion engines. It makes it so your siege weapon blast radius though is massively increased. It costs 1,000 food and 600 gold, which is kind of the trade-off, especially if we're looking at it in terms of a 1v1 technology. That's super expensive. It's more expensive than even getting the Onager upgrade. And especially if you're getting a lot of other upgrades for your units already, this is a massive expense. Surprisingly, it also adds a lot of value to your bombard cannons as well. If you're using those to clean up skirmishes, you've got like an armed bombard cannon combination of your own, it can be pretty good in that situation. I think it's going to be a B tier technology, or maybe even a C tier. And the thing is, it's a pretty, if we weren't looking at cost, it'd probably be near the A or the S tier, but because of the cost of getting to it and the ability to get there, it's pretty difficult to get this technology in most games. Next up, we have another one of those more situational technologies from the Franks. It's Bearded Axe. It increases throwing axeman range by 1, and it costs 400 food and 400 gold. So if you're already going for throwing axeman, there's no reason not to get this technology. It's on the cheap side, and it increases your range, which is always a additional value. That being said, it's only impacting one unit, and you don't always go throwing axeman with the Franks. In fact, I'd argue that you more often don't go throwing axeman with Franks than you do go throwing axeman. So it's gonna be a... Ooh. I don't know, I feel like it's slightly more usable in more situations than Meganes. Only just, and the cost kind of justifies it being a little bit above, I think. But less so than Torsion engines, I'm gonna say. Okay, this one is instantly going to the S tier, Goths with Perfusion. It makes it so your barracks work speed is increased by 100. It's basically what makes the Goth flood so dangerous in Imperial Age. Increasing the barrack work speed by that amount is just insane. You see how quickly they can repop their armies with a fully boomed economy. And it would be a criminal act to not put this in the S tier, honestly. On the other end of the spectrum though, we have the Huns with Atheism. It costs 500 food and 500 gold, and it makes Relic and Wonder victories take 100 years longer, and it also now reduces your enemy Relic income by 50%. Instant F tier. You're investing 500 gold to try and deny some enemy Relic income. If you've got like a really Relic heavy map, let's say Wolf Hill or something, then sure, this might be worth it, but generally speaking, this is just an expensive technology that rarely gets any value. Next up, we have the Incas with Couriers. Oh, sorry, Fabric Shields now. It used to be called Couriers. Increases your Kamuk, Slinger, and Eagle Warrior armor and Pierce armor by 1 and 2 respectively. They cost 600 food and 600 gold. Now, situationally, this makes Incas Eagles the best in Imperial Age, only against archers, but it's still a really strong technology for them. It basically makes them invulnerable to most archer units. It's gonna be probably just a little behind Garland Wars, but above Maghrabi Camels for me. I still think that Mines is better than both of these if we're looking at Eagles specifically. But the fact that it impacts multiple units and makes them super resistant to both types of damage even, I think it's a pretty huge upgrade. Indians is next with Shatagini, sorry for the butchering of that pronunciation. It increases the hand cannoneer range by 1 and it costs 500 food and 300 gold. If you're already going for hand cannoneers and you have a castle, it is worth getting. That being said, it only impacts one unit that rarely sees a lot of usage. Hand cannoneers kind of suck in most situations. So for me, it's probably gonna go below even Logistica. I think that it has potential if hand cannoneers are a stronger unit in more situations, but that extra 1 range, yes, it means that they now have equal range to Arbs, but they still will die to Arbalesters in if you're talking en masse for both sides. Coming up next, we have the Italians of Silk Road. Now this technology is completely useless in a 1v1 as it decreases your trade cart and trade cog cost by 50%. Costs 500 food and 250 gold. So if you're making a lot of trade carts for a team game, it can be quite a useful technology to get at some point, as you will eventually save quite a lot of resources. Even if we ignore the food costs, even making 5 trade carts makes it a net neutral. But in a 1v1 it is completely useless as you won't be making trade cards, so it's pretty hard to justify where it should go based on that. I think it has more of a case usage than Shatagni. And maybe even more so than Logistical or the Cuban mercenaries, but I wouldn't say much further above that. I'm going to put it on the E tier. I think if it impacted your team as well in some way, I think it'd be a little bit further up, but as it's just impacting you, I don't think it's that huge of a bonus. And next up we have Casa Peruto from the Japanese. It increases your pack speed and attack speed of trebuchets. It is a little bit on the expensive side, costing 750 wood and 400 gold, but it does significantly change the way that trebs basically work. Usually packing and repacking takes such a long time that your units have been sniped by that point, whereas Japanese trebs can quite easily get out of bad situations, and the faster firing speed means that they are more dangerous to castles than generic trebuchets, of course. I don't think it's quite as good as Warwolf, but I think it's really close between the two technologies, and Trebs is such a commonplace unit that I think it has to be an A tier technology from me. Coming up next, we have Khmer with the double crossbow upgrade. It makes it so ballista elephants and scorpions fire 2 projectiles, and it costs 700 food and 400 gold. If you're already going for Scorpions, which is in a lot of late game compositions anyway, it's definitely worth getting, and it's very hard to push a bull of Scorpions from the Khmer, especially if they've got a decent meat shield in front of it. That being said, Scorpions are pretty vulnerable to bombard cannons, onages, for example, so it's a bit situational and it does hinder your mobility. I think it's probably going to be a slight bit above Torsion engines as it's slightly more accessible. But not any further than that, I'm going to say, for the moment. Next up we have Shinkichon from the Koreans, and it increases your mangonel range by 1. And it costs 800 wood and 500 gold. So Koreans already have the lower minimum range for the mangonels. But now increasing their range by 1 as well means that they even outrange Briton Arbs before they get to Yeoman. So situationally, this is a really strong technology, and it also means that you can flatten your opponent's archer units before they even get into range of you. And even other units such as infantry and occasionally cavalry can be flattened from even a further range than usual. I think it's a pretty strong technology. I'm not sure if I would place it beyond the B tier, because it only impacts 1 unit. I'm gonna say, this is a hard one honestly. Maybe slightly better than Rocketry. I still think Maghreb Cabals is still pretty strong for the late game. Whereas if this impacted more than 1 unit, I think I'd place it a little bit higher. Lithuanians have tower shields, which increases spearmen and skirmish appears armor by 2. It costs 500 food and 200 gold. So this basically means that your halbs are slightly worse than generic against melee, but now are equal in terms of against arrow fire to other units. But it makes it so you have some of the best skirmishers in the game. So you do sacrifice a little bit of melee armor, as the Lithuanians lack the final melee armor for infantry. But sacrificing that to give you some of the best skirmishers in the game against arrow fire, whilst also making it, whilst also having the fastest skirmishers as well, I think this is a decent technology. I'm gonna place it for maybe slightly below double crossbow. I think if Lithuanians weren't trading that 1 melee armor on their halbs, it would almost be better in some ways, but then at the same time, it's not a bad technology, and if you're making a lot of trash units anyway, you will eventually want to pick this up. Magyars have the Recur bow upgrade, which increases your cavalry archer range and attack by 1, and it costs 600 wood and 400 gold. Now, in most Magyar late game compositions, you will want to get to cavalry archers just because of how strong this upgrade is. Going Cavalry Archer plus Hussar or Cavalry Archer plus Magyar Hussar is such a beastly unit composition that I find it pretty difficult to deal with most civs. For me, it's going to be in the A tier with the Britons and the Japanese. I honestly don't know if I'd place it above or below this, but it's definitely a really good technology, and if you're going CA with Magyars, you're always going to want to pick this up. It does only impact 1 unit, similar to a lot of other upgrades, but it really does increase the damage output by such a large amount, and being able to range the same as Arbs is just huge on a unit that usually has a bit of trouble against them. Malay has Forced Levy, which now removes the militia gold wine cost, and it converts it to food. It costs 850 food and 500 gold, but it's going straight into the S tier, purely because it's really hard to deal with the late game Malay trash spam. It's similar to a Goths in some ways, except halbs and two-handed swordsmen only cost food and wood, and the only real counter to this is massed ranged units. And of course, Malay get fully upgraded skirms, for example. They get their own fully upgraded arbs. They have a lot of options to deal with enemy ranged units, of course. Generic ones, less so against Britons and Ethiopians, which they can struggle against a little bit more. But being able to flood your opponent with trash units like this, which can also take down buildings pretty easily, is a very strong upgrade, along with all of the other Malay bonuses. Malayans get Frimb, which increases stable attack by 5. So this impacts all of their units. This is their light cav, their cavalier, their heavy camels, so all of their stable units. They don't get blast furnace. It does mean that overall they're only +3 attack, but it's such a strong technology, and being able to really easily raid economy with your light cavalry is just insane. It does cost quite a bit, it's 650 food and 400 gold. But if you normally, if you're playing as a cavalry civ in the late game, you'd be getting Hussar anyway. And Hussar costs 600 gold. Well, actually, is it 600 gold? I'm not 100% certain, that might be Halberdier. But I know it's quite a lot of resources. So in reality, you're trading the Hussar upgrade to have some of the best camels in the game, and some of the best Cavalier in a 1v1 situation. And also still getting really good light cav, especially for raiding. For me, this is an S tier bonus. I even might be thinking of putting the Malay in the S tier as well. It's hard to tell. Mines get El Dorado, which increases Eagle Warrior hit points by 40. It costs 750 food and 400 gold. 450 gold, my apologies. El Dorado makes Mine Eagles so tanky, and they're already good against so many different unit types that you're always going to want to get it in the late game Mayan army composition if you can get to it. I think for me this is better, even though both the Aztecs and Incas increases has effects for different unit types. I honestly think that the Mayan bonus is strong because most of the time for all three of these civs, you are going to want to be using it for your eagles primarily. So I think it's a little bit above, even maybe the Celts. I'm going to put it in the B tier, maybe even low A tier for the El Dorado upgrades. Mongols get Drill, which increases your siege weapon movement speed by 50%, and it costs 500 food and 450 gold. Drill is a massive upgrade. Being able to get into position with siege units so much more quickly, is just beyond this world. You can see the Ferrari Mongol siege rams going in and knocking buildings down like there's no tomorrow. And then the onagers being able to get into position faster against the archers as well is always a little bit scarier for your opponent. It's going to be an S tier upgrade beyond the Malians, but I don't think it's as big as the Goths perfusion. Persians have Mahouts, which increases war elephant movement speed by 30%. It costs 300 gold and 300 food. I think this is our second F tier bonus. Honestly, most of the time you don't make war elephants. This is a nice and cheap upgrade though if you are making them. But war elephants are so expensive, and like whilst they are extremely pop efficient, one of the biggest counters to them is monks. And even helps if you got a mass of them as well, and they cost so much to mass as well. It's not quite as bad as atheism, which is like, if I should even added an extra tier like a Z tier, because atheism is beyond useless. This isn't useless all the time, but it's useless most of the time, I'm gonna say. Portuguese get Arquebus, which increases gunpowder unit accuracy against moving targets. It also makes bombard cannon and bombard tower projectiles move faster. It costs 700 food and 400 gold, and if you're going into Imperial Age as a Portuguese, most of the time you are going to want to switch into some kind of gunpowder composition, or you already will have some gunpowder composition due to organ guns as well. This is another one of those kind of B, C tier upgrades because you're already saving so much gold using the Portuguese bonuses with whatever unit composition you're going for. And this is definitely not something to skip out on if you are going for gunpowder. But not every game gets to that late stage of the game, and I think there are better Imperial Age technologies to work towards. I'm thinking it might even be a bit better than the extra range on the mangonels. I think I might have even overrated this slightly. I think both the Chinese, actually no, the Chinese upgrade I think is fine, whereas I think the Korean one's actually a C tier. Saracens get Zealotry, which increases Mameluke and Camel Rider hit points by 20. It costs 500 food and 450 gold. So it used to give 30 hit points and cost a little bit more, but Saracens now had 10 of their hit points moved to as just a generic civ bonus. So now Zealotry is less important to get. If you're going for a massive camel units, you are going to want to get it, and as it impacts both Mamelukes and camels, it's at least a little bit more versatile than some of these other bonuses. It also makes them some of the arguably tankiest camels in the game. I think it's actually tankier against melee than Indian camels, although I'm not 100% certain because Indians are lacking that final armor upgrade for their camels. So I'm gonna put this in the B tier. I think slightly ahead of even Bagrabi camels. These two I don't really want to split up because I feel like they're just like, I feel like all of the Meso Imperial Age unique tags are all pretty much as useful as each other. I feel like it's slightly more situational than Fury Celtica though, because you might not always have a castle up as Saracens, and investing into it if you're not already planning to in early Imp, for example, isn't always worth it. Although you do, in most situations, you do want to castle up, of course. Coming up next, we have the Sicilians with Scootage. Scootage gives each team member 15 gold per military unit. So in a 1v1, it costs about 30 units approximately before it actually becomes even on the gold cost. I believe you gain 50 gold in that situation. So you do need quite a lot of units to make it worth it, but it can be situationally good, especially in team games. Let's say that all of your players are 200 pop and 80 of those are military, for example. That's a large sum of gold all going into your team. I believe that's roughly 1200 gold per team member. So I think it's probably going to be another B tier technology. And situationally, it's like closer to the C and the D, and situationally, it's probably even closer to the A and the S tier, just depending on what kind of unit composition you've all got, how many units all of you have. I think it's probably going to be just ahead of the Portuguese bonus. Now, Slavs get Drazina, and it makes it so infantry deal trample damage. This impacts both your halberdiers and your champions. It costs 1200 food and 500 gold, and that's the biggest problem with getting to this technology. And that being said, it really changes how these units deal with other enemy unit types. Champions now absolutely and utterly shred through most other unit types, except for archers. And even when you mix some halbs as well, a mixture of halbs and champions with Drazina will deal with almost every single melee composition, and then you have Slav Siege behind it. It's quite difficult to get to, but once you've got to it, it's such a powerful technology that I think we're going to put it in the B tier. And maybe even A tier, because recurve bow is a lot cheaper. It also increases their backyard's late game composition by so much. Whereas Slavs Drazina, it does increase their late game composition by a lot. But it's very hard to get to in a lot of 1v1 situations. Team games is a little easier to get to, but a lot of the time you won't be going for halb siege compositions if you're playing on like a team game in Arabia, for example. Next up we have Spanish with Supremacy. Now this one's known as a bit of a meme. It gives your villagers 6 attack, 2 extra armor and pierce armor, and 40 additional hit points, making them roughly equivalent to a longswordsman. It's only 450 food and 250 gold, so if you already have a castle up, and you're in that super late game where, or not even super late game, early to mid imp, and you're worried about getting raided, this makes your economy much harder to raid. Of course, villagers don't attack back on their own, so you will have to you have to make sure that you are keeping an eye on your villagers if they do need to fight back. But it increases the number of hits that a villager can take from a hussar by, if I'm not mistaken, about 6 or 7. So it's a really strong technology against getting raided, even beyond its more memeing usages. So for me, this is a solid B tier technology. It's going to be probably a little bit above the Portuguese bonus. You won't get it every single game if you don't already have a castle up for whatever reason. Although in Spanish, most of the time you will do to go and get some conquistadors out in Castle Age. But there's almost no situation in which I wouldn't just get this if I'm already floating some food and some gold, and I'm at a decent and healthy poppy. Tatars get Timurid Siegecraft, which gives +2 trebuchet range, and most importantly, it allows you to train flaming camels from castles. It costs 400 wood and 500 gold, and if you already have like 5-6 trebs out, you're pushing and you're winning a fight. I think it's a good technology to get instead of training additional trebs, because that extra 2 range is actually pretty strong. But it's expensive, it takes up training time of the trebs in the first place, and flaming camels for the most part are not that particularly strong of a unit, so it's quite a situational technology to get. I'm gonna place it just a little bit below mana for cavalry. At least with the mana for cavalry, you can go in and now suddenly you can eat a town center very quickly, whereas this just makes it so you win treb wars more easily and outrange pretty much every other thing in the game that you can create. Teutons get crenellations, which increases castle range by 3 and garrisoned infantry fire arrows. Now this means that Teuton castles against generic castles have 2 additional range and not 3 additional range. This is due to Teutons lacking bracer, and it costs 600 food and 400 stone. So in terms of its usage, it's really good when you're against a bombard cannon civ. It makes it so your castles actually outrange bombard cannons with or without getting siege engineers, for example. The only ones that avoid this are Turk bombard cannons, where they get artillery, which we'll be talking about very shortly. That bit, and also infantry firing arrows is a nice little bonus if you've got like a massive Haubs, for example, or some champions or some Teutonic knights that you're using. So I think this is more of an arena technology than an Arabia technology, so it can be situationally quite strong. That being said, it also can be it's quite an investment. 400 stone is quite a lot of investment. I think it's probably slightly more useful in more situations than the 1 extra range on onagers. But it is a defensive technology that isn't always super useful. Turks get artillery, which increases bombard tower, bombard cannon and cannon galleon range by 2. It costs 500 gold and 450 stone. So similar to Teutons, this is quite an expensive technology, especially in terms of stone cost, because stone is usually one of the least accessible resources on most maps. I don't know if I think it's probably slightly more useful than Chattagny. I'm not certain, honestly. But most of the time I would argue that you shouldn't need this additional range. The additional range is more overkill than anything else. Although it's pretty fun to use. Vietnamese get paper money, which makes it so each team member receives 500 gold, and it costs 500 food and 300 wood. So obviously in a team game, this is much more useful than it is in a 1v1. That being said, if the market has already been bottomed out, this can be a nice little extra supply of gold in the late game. 500 gold isn't usually entirely game changing, but it can get a few additional siege units or ratans out, for example, if you are completely out of gold. I think this is probably a C tier bonus. It's not like Scootage where it's giving you can get like an absolutely ridiculous lump sum of gold from researching Scootage. Whereas for Vietnamese, you're capped at that 500 gold. But it's not an entirely useless bonus in 1v1s or in team games, which I quite like. And lastly, but not least, we get the Vikings with Berserker Gang. It makes it so Berserks regenerate twice as fast, from 20 HP to 40 HP. It is pretty pricey, it costs 850 food and 400 gold. But it does make it so if you've got a massive Berserks, it's really hard to fight them with infantry or cavalry at that point, usually because you already have chieftains. And if you're fighting Berserkers with infantry, this additional HP regeneration really does start to add up. For me, this is probably another B tier technology, as it only impacts 1 unit, but it does make that unit quite significantly stronger. I'm gonna say it's slightly above Supremacy, but below Scootage. Scootage is one of those technologies that I really do think that could be C, D, B, A, or S tier. It really depends on the individual game. Whereas something like Berserker Gang is more situational. You don't always get to Berserks in a game, but when you do get to them, if you can get this technology, it's very strong. Alright, that's gonna do it for me. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with my content. I'll see you guys later.